taught to watch out for cold shadows in abandoned houses or footsteps echoing behind us in dark alleys. But the most terrifying traps are the ones wrapped in velvet, masked as friendship, and handed directly to you. I thought I was just supporting a friend who was going through a rough patch. I didn't know I was rubbing an ancient binding curse directly into my skin until my mind was clouded and my life savings were entirely hollowed out. It started back in the winter, when the fog off the coast kept the town perpetually damp and gray. My name is Chloe, and at the time I was living a relatively quiet life, working a standard corporate desk job and sharing a modest space with my grandmother. I've always been told that I have a strong disposition, what some local old-timers call a heavy aura, meaning I rarely get spooked or carried away by strange vibes. But I've always possessed a quiet, under-the-surface sensitivity to the atmosphere of certain places. I can instantly feel when a room turns heavy, or when the air carries the stagnant, invisible weight of something that shouldn't be there. That was until I reconnected with Harper. I had casually known Harper for a few years. We used to cross paths late at night when I worked as a mixologist at a high-end downtown lounge. We weren't close friends by any stretch, just familiar faces in the same nocturnal social circle. But in early 2024, Harper became central to a massive, ugly wave of relationship drama within our old group. People were spreading horrific rumors about her, picking sides and completely ostracizing her. Feeling a wave of unprovoked pity for someone being publicly torn apart, I stepped in and defended her online, trying to cool the flames. I thought it was just a passing act of kindness. I didn't realize it would make me her next target. Shortly after the drama settled, Harper reached out to me out of the blue. She poured her heart out, thanking me profusely, and insisted on forming an intense, rapid friendship. It felt a bit suffocating, but I shrugged it off as her simply being lonely. A few weeks later, she took a sudden, extended trip abroad to a remote, deeply superstitious rural border town overseas. She didn't message me much while she was away, but the day she returned, she didn't call me to meet up. Instead, she shipped a heavy cardboard box of gifts directly to my doorstep. Inside the box was a collection of odd items, a traditional, heavy woven wrap skirt, a few generic sheet masks, and a single premium spherical lip balm. When I pulled the lip balm out of its wrapping, an immediate wave of unease hit me. The plastic sphere was heavily worn, covered in deep, jagged scratches, as if it had been dragged across gravel or locked away in an old drawer for decades. When I opened it, the scent was completely wrong. It didn't smell like the sweet synthetic vanilla the brand was famous for. It carried a faint, unsettlingly organic odor, something thick, metallic, and earthy. But my lips were chapped from the winter chill, so without thinking, I swiped it across my skin once or twice, closed it, and set it on my vanity. Looking back, that exact moment was when the fog rolled into my brain. Within days of using that scratched-up cosmetic gift, an aggressive, unnatural shift occurred in my personality. I became completely codependent on Harper. We began hanging out every single day, and she systematically began draining my life. Harper was an independent makeup artist who pulled in heavy cash from high-paying bridal gigs and elite events, and her family was exceptionally wealthy. I, on the other hand, was living on a tightly budgeted office salary. Yet, every single time we went out, Harper would slip into a dark, melancholic mood, weeping about how she was completely broke, drowning in unexpected bills, and utterly stressed out. Driven by a strange, zombie-like compulsion that felt entirely outside of my control, I started paying for absolutely everything. I bought her expensive multi-course dinners, covered her drinks at high-end bars, and paid for endless daily cafes. I was completely neglecting my own needs, wearing old clothes and skipping meals just to ensure Harper was pampered. The terrifying part wasn't just the spending, it was the psychological blindness. In broad daylight, I would watch Harper complain about having $0 while she literally unboxed diamond jewelry, expensive imported perfumes, and designer dresses right in front of me. In a normal state of mind, any rational person would have instantly realized they were being aggressively manipulated and used, but my brain couldn't process it. It was as if a thick, dark veil was draped over my consciousness, forcing me to nod, smile, and pull out my credit card. Within months, my humble savings were completely wiped out. I began aggressively maxing out multiple high-limit credit cards just to sustain her lifestyle. To make matters worse, Harper began utilizing intense psychological manipulation, constantly body-shaming me under the guise of tough love. She would make cruel comments about my weight, comparing me to grotesque caricatures, before whispering, "I only say this because I'm your only real friend, Chloe. You should pay me to be your personal trainer. Just sign up for my monthly fitness program." My grandmother saw right through it from the absolute beginning. Normally a deeply polite and welcoming woman, she completely refused to acknowledge Harper whenever she came to pick me up. She would sit in the living room, staring straight ahead, treating Harper like an empty pocket of air. One evening, after Harper left, my grandmother gripped my arm tightly. Her eyes were wide with genuine fear. "Chloe, that girl is pulling the light straight out of you. Look at your skin. Look at your eyes. You look like a walking corpse." But the fog in my mind was too thick. I snapped at my grandmother and left the room. The turning point came in late autumn. I was mindlessly scrolling through social media when an algorithmic recommendation popped up for an old alternative spiritual sanctuary located in the historical district downtown. It was a quiet temple practicing a rare, highly meditative form of Eastern mysticism. For reasons I couldn't explain, looking at the photos of the sanctuary made the back of my neck tingle. Desperate for a change of scenery, I casually texted Harper and asked if she wanted to visit it with me. Surprisingly, she agreed, boasting about how much she knew about mystical geometry. The moment we walked through the heavy wooden doors of the sanctuary, the atmosphere shifted violently. The air inside was completely still, thick with the scent of burning sandalwood. In the center of the main hall, a massive, highly intricate geometric mandala was suspended from the vaulted ceiling. I walked directly underneath the mandala, sat on a woven floor cushion, and looked up into the perfect, swirling symmetry. The instant my eyes locked onto the center of the geometric design, a physical jolt ran down my spine. Before I could even process what was happening, tears began streaming down my face in hot, heavy rivers. I wasn't sad, I wasn't panicked, but I was sobbing hysterically, my chest heaving as if something incredibly heavy was being forcibly dragged out of my lungs. It felt like a spiritual fever breaking. With every tear that hit the floor, the thick, suffocating fog inside my skull began to rapidly evaporate. Suddenly, my eyes focused. I sat up, wiping my face, and looked around the room. For the first time in an entire year, my brain was perfectly clear. The terrifying reality of my life crashed into me like a tidal wave. I saw the mountain of credit card debt I had accumulated, the maxed out accounts, my hollowed out life, and the absolute parasite sitting quietly on the cushion next to me, watching me with cold, calculating eyes. The curse had broken. Over the next 2 months, I systematically began pulling away. Every single time Harper called me to go out for drinks or expensive dinners, I flatly refused, making up mundane excuses about redecorating my bedroom or tending to the plants on my balcony. When we did occasionally hang out in group settings, the dynamic was completely dead. The gravy train had stopped. I forced her to split every single bill down to the exact penny, looking her straight in the eye without a shred of the old compliance. By the winter of 2025, I cut her out of my life entirely, blocking her number and deleting her from every platform. Once the tether was severed, the dark reality of who I had been dealing with finally came to light. I reached out to a few older acquaintances from the lounge scene and cautiously asked about Harper's past. The stories that came back made my blood run cold. Harper was a notorious, predatory grifter within the city. She had a documented history of targeting vulnerable, kind-hearted people, isolating them from their families, and systematically brainwashing them until they were financially ruined. A few weeks later, still deeply shaken by how easily my mind had been hijacked, I visited an intuitive spiritual reader in the city. She took one look at my energy and shuddered. "You were locked in an aggressive binding glamour," she whispered, laying out her cards. "Someone fed an entity a piece of your essence and bound it to a heavily charged personal item, something you applied directly to your face or body. It was designed to dull your rational mind and turn you into a submissive servant." I instantly thought of the scratched-up, metallic-smelling spherical lip balm that had sat on my vanity for months. I went home that very afternoon, grabbed the plastic sphere with a pair of thick gloves, and threw it directly into a dumpster miles away from my house. I've spent the last few months working double shifts, slowly chipping away at the massive mountain of debt Harper left in my name. My mind is completely my own again, and the warm, quiet atmosphere has finally returned to the home I share with my grandmother. But a few nights ago, I was driving home late from the lounge after a late shift. As I stopped at a deserted, fog-covered intersection a few blocks from my apartment, I glanced over at the sidewalk. Standing beneath the flickering yellow glow of a street lamp was Harper. She was wearing a brand new designer trench coat, her long hair blowing in the damp wind. She wasn't looking for a cab. She was standing completely still, her head cocked at an unnatural, stiff angle, staring directly through my windshield. Her face was cast in deep shadow, but as the traffic light turned green, she slowly raised her hand, holding up a familiar, scratched-up plastic sphere, and smiled a wide, vacant smile. I slammed on the gas, my tires screeching into the dark. I cut her out of my life. But as I sit in my locked bedroom tonight, looking out at the foggy street below, I can't shake the terrifying realization that the entities she commands still know exactly where I sleep. We try to convince ourselves that our homes are safe havens, entirely cut off from the dark histories of the people who occupied them before us. But sometimes, the past doesn't just linger in the woodwork. It's deliberately buried right beneath your feet. I thought I was just clearing out some old dirt to plant a garden on my balcony. I didn't know I was unearthing a terrifying, blood-soaked ward that would hijack my subconscious and trigger a physiological nightmare. To completely cut ties with Harper and escape the suffocating, draining cycle of our toxic friendship, I needed a drastic change of scenery. I used the mundane pretext of redecorating my life and diving into urban gardening to justify spending less time with her. My grandmother and I managed to secure a lease on a slightly older, charming suburban townhouse located in a quiet, historic district a few miles outside the main city center. My bedroom was located on the upper floor, and it featured a set of glass double doors that opened directly onto a private 60-square-foot enclosed sunroom. To prevent break-ins, the previous owners had heavily reinforced the sunroom with a floor-to-ceiling iron security grid, what people in older urban areas often call a tiger cage. Running along the base of the iron grid were several large, built-in concrete planter boxes. They were currently filled with packed, dried-out gray soil, mixed with bits of household trash and jagged shards of broken glass left behind by decades of forgotten tenants. It looked incredibly uninviting, so on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I decided to grab a heavy trowel and a box of garbage bags, determined to excavate the old dirt and replace it with fresh, fertile soil. I managed to clear out the first concrete box without any issues, but as I moved to the second planter and dug my trowel deep near the center, the metal blade struck something solid and metallic. Curious, I cleared away the compacted earth and the broken glass shards with my gloved hands. I pulled out a dirt-encrusted, faded plastic canister with a tightly sealed, rusted screw-on lid. It looked like an old, industrial-sized cocoa powder tin. It was buried far too deeply to have ended up there by accident. Intrigued, I twisted the tight lid open. An immediate, stomach-turning stench flooded the small sunroom. It was a thick, pitch-black, putrid mud that smelled overwhelmingly of stagnant swamp water and metallic copper. Gagging from the odor, I tilted the canister and poured the thick sludge directly into a large trash bag. As the liquid drained, I spotted a strange bundle trapped at the bottom of the tin. I carefully pulled it out. It was a pair of old wooden chopsticks, snapped perfectly in half, wrapped tightly in rotted twine that looked like it had originally been dyed a bright crimson red. Tucked directly beneath the knotted twine were two small, tightly rolled slips of yellow parchment covered in faint, spidery, unreadable black ink. Even without any spiritual expertise, a cold chill ran down my spine. It looked exactly like a localized binding hex or a sinister ward meant to trap something inside the earth. Shuddering with a deep sense of unease, I threw the canister, the broken chopsticks, and the parchment slips into the heavy trash bag, tied it in a double knot, and dragged it out to the alleyway dumpster. I thoroughly washed my hands, locked the balcony doors, and crawled into bed, expecting a peaceful evening. I was dead wrong. Just as my consciousness began to drift into a deep sleep, a sharp, localized sound shattered the silence of my bedroom. Knock, knock, knock. My eyes snapped open. I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound was coming directly from the glass balcony door. I tried to tell myself it was just a strong gust of wind or a stray branch scraping against the exterior structure. But then I remembered. My sunroom was entirely enclosed by a floor-to-ceiling iron security grid. There were no trees near that side of the townhouse, no fire escapes, and no ledges. It was physically impossible for a human being to climb up there from the street without a massive extension ladder and a set of bolt cutters. 5 minutes dragged by in agonizing silence. Just as I convinced myself I was merely hearing things, the noise returned. But this time, it wasn't a gentle tap. Thud, 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 thud. The glass pane violently vibrated in its frame. Someone or something was slamming its weight against the door. The metal doorknob began to rattle and jiggle frantically, twisting left and right as if an invisible intruder was desperately trying to force the lock. Driven by a wave of pure, adrenaline-fueled panic, I leaped out of bed, lunged across the room, and violently yanked back the heavy curtains. The moonlit sunroom was completely empty. The security bars were untouched. The iron latch on the outer frame was still securely padlocked. My breath caught in my throat, my hand shaking violently. I hurried over to my vanity, grabbed a bundle of sandalwood incense and lit it, filling the room with thick, protective smoke. I sat on the edge of my bed and softly whispered a frantic apology into the empty air. begging whatever presence I had disturbed to leave me in peace. The aggressive rattling finally subsided, though I spent the rest of the night shivering under my blankets, catching only a few minutes of restless sleep before waking up to a faint, echoing tap at exactly 5 a.m. A few days passed, and the overwhelming terror of that night slowly faded into a dull paranoia. The sunroom project was left half-finished, and leaving the empty concrete planters filled with exposed roots felt like an invitation for failure, so I forced myself back outside to finish the job. As I dug into the third and fourth planter boxes, the earth grew progressively weirder. I kept unearthing a bizarre cache of deliberately buried junk: rusted metal spoons, plastic lighters, and broken pieces of old children's toys, almost like a miniature play kitchen set that had been systematically buried deep under the soil. Then, my shovel struck something soft and pliable at the very bottom of the built-in box. I reached my hand into the dark earth and pulled out a heavy, double-knotted black plastic trash bag. The moment it broke the surface, a horrific, suffocating odor filled the air, the thick, undeniable scent of fresh blood and rotting organic matter. The bag felt heavy, squishy, and gelatinous, like it was filled with a thick, coagulated gel. A wave of intense nausea hit me so hard, I nearly vomited on the spot. Refusing to open it and witness whatever horrific secret was sealed inside, I carried the foul bag straight down to the outdoor garbage container, sealed the lid, rushed back inside to scrub my arms with antibacterial soap, and collapsed onto my bed from a sudden, crushing wave of unnatural exhaustion. The moment my eyes closed, I slipped into the most terrifyingly lucid nightmare of my entire life. In the dream, I was lying in my actual bedroom. My space was separated from my older sister's room by a thin, hollow drywall partition. Suddenly, an excruciating, tearing pain erupted in my lower abdomen. It was a violent, crushing pressure that felt exactly like intense labor contractions. The agony was so vivid and agonizingly realistic that I screamed out in the dream, throwing my body sideways and violently punching my fist directly into the thin drywall partition. To my horror, the drywall cracked open like an eggshell. From the dark, hollow space inside the wall, the exact double-knotted black plastic bag I had thrown into the garbage container earlier that afternoon tumbled out, landing heavily on my mattress. In the dream, my hands moved completely against my will, tearing through the thick black plastic layers. Inside, nestled in a wide pool of dark coagulated blood, was a fully formed, motionless newborn infant. A wave of overwhelming primal grief crashed over me. I scooped the cold, bloody child into my arms, pressing it tightly against my chest, howling into the dark like a wounded animal as the putrid, metallic stench of blood filled my throat. I jolted upright in pitch-black darkness, a blood-curdling scream tearing out of my throat. It was 2 a.m. I was completely drenched in a thick sheet of cold sweat, my chest heaving in ragged gasps, despite the fact that my air conditioner was humming at 16 degrees Celsius and 2 electric fans were blowing directly at my face. My stomach was still actively cramping with a dull residual ache. Paralyzed with fear, looking into every dark corner of my room, I spent the next several hours crying hysterically, reading protective spiritual mantras off my phone, until the sheer mental exhaustion finally dragged me back down into a catatonic sleep. I slept for 14 hours straight. When I finally opened my eyes again, it was 4 p.m. the next afternoon. My grandmother and my uncle were both sitting quietly at my bedside, their faces twisted with deep concern. My grandmother gently wiped my forehead, telling me that they had been trying to wake me for hours. She said I had been thrashing violently against the sheets, weeping and groaning in a distorted voice, repeating the same phrase over and over again. It's not my child. Please, take it away." Weak, dizzy, and trembling, I begged my uncle to drive me straight to the spiritual sanctuary downtown. The moment we arrived, I ran beneath the massive geometric mandala in the main hall, collapsing onto a floor cushion. I spent the next 3 hours weeping and reciting protective prayers until the suffocating weight on my chest finally began to lift. On the drive back, my uncle tried to force me to eat, pulling over at a small local diner and ordering a bowl of warm seafood broth to settle my stomach. But the second the steaming bowl was placed in front of me, the thick, fishy, metallic aroma triggered a violent, instantaneous flashback to the blood-soaked bag from my nightmare. I bolted to the restroom and vomited uncontrollably until my stomach was entirely empty. When we returned home, my grandmother had already prepared an old folklore remedy. She had spoken to an elderly neighbor who knew the grim history of our district. The entire neighborhood had been built directly adjacent to an old abandoned colonial graveyard from the 1800s. The neighbor explained that when land is disturbed near a graveyard boundary, wandering, unnameable energies often cling to the soil. She instructed my grandmother to take 2 fresh, raw eggs from a young hen, place them on the old graveyard boundary stone as a protective offering, recite a prayer for safe passage, and bring them back. My grandmother cracked the blessed eggs into a glass and forced me to swallow the cold, slimy mixture whole. The moment the liquid hit my stomach, the intense, labor-like cramps flared up with blinding intensity. I dashed to the bathroom and violently vomited the eggs into the sink. But the moment my stomach emptied, an incredible, physical weight was instantly lifted from my shoulders. The fever vanished, the fog in my skull cleared, and my mind snapped back to perfect, pristine clarity. The following morning, my grandmother went out to the sunroom to finish the excavation herself. Digging through the very bottom of the final concrete planter box, she uncovered the terrifying remainder of the hidden cache: an old, rotted rubber baby pacifier, several discarded sanitary pads stained with dark, ancient blood, and a handful of tiny, unidentifiable effigies carved from bone, no larger than a human finger. The spiritual toll of handling those cursed objects was heavy. Later that evening, my grandmother fell severely ill, bedridden with a draining, unnatural fatigue that left her weak and pale for an entire week. But we refused to let the house win. My uncle and I systematically discarded every single item into an incinerator miles away. We filled the concrete boxes with entirely fresh, blessed earth, lined the sunroom with cleansing lavender and sage plants, and kept a small speaker playing a continuous, peaceful loop of meditative chants to purify the air. By the 9th day, my grandmother completely recovered her strength, and the terrifying nightly anomalies in room 4B vanished into the dark, never to return. We still live in that suburban townhouse, and the warm, quiet atmosphere has finally returned to our home. My grandmother is healthy, and my mind belongs entirely to me again. But every afternoon, when the sun begins to set and the shadows stretch long across the hardwood floor, I find myself standing at the glass double doors, looking out into the sunroom. My eyes always drift down to the fresh, green plants thriving in the concrete boxes. The soil looks perfectly normal now, rich and dark under the fading light. But as the darkness rolls in, a terrifying thought creeps into the back of my mind. We cleared out the concrete planters on our balcony, but I can't shake the freezing, desperate realization of what might still be buried deep within the earth, directly beneath the foundation of the house where we sleep. We pay premium prices for 5-star luxury hotels because we believe we are purchasing safety, privacy, and peace of mind. We trust the security cameras, the electronic key cards, and the sterile, polished environment. But a heavy mahogany door and a digital lock cannot protect you from entities that don't require a key card to enter. I thought we were alone in our luxury suite. I didn't know that while I slept, a completely different guest list had checked into our room. The trip was supposed to be a relaxing vacation after a grueling year of corporate transition. My name is Peter, and my wife Leah, and I had saved up for months to book a premium corner suite at one of the most historic, prestigious 5-star hotels downtown. It was a massive architectural marvel built in the late Victorian era, boasting grand marble staircases, thick velvet drapes, and an old-world elegance that masked the sheer scale of the building. Outwardly, the neighborhood was immaculate. A bustling, high-end district lined with ancient trees, gourmet restaurants, and a constant stream of wealthy tourists. But the moment you stepped into the upper residential corridors of the hotel, the vibrant energy of the city completely evaporated. The hallways were unnaturally wide, carpeted in deep crimson rugs that swallowed the sound of your footsteps, leaving only a heavy, ringing silence. We checked into room 412 at exactly 2 p.m. on a crisp autumn afternoon. The suite was breathtaking. It featured high ceilings, an oversized plush king bed, and a large dark mahogany vanity table equipped with deep, heavy wooden drawers. Separating the main bedroom from the bathroom was a modern open-concept design element, a wall consisting entirely of massive, heavy frosted glass panes. While unpacking, Leah pulled a thick white paper envelope from her travel bag. It contained our entire vacation fund, thousands of dollars in crisp cash. Wanting to avoid carrying it around the crowded city streets, she pulled open the deep drawer of the mahogany vanity table and slid the envelope all the way to the back, underneath a decorative guest booklet. "It's perfectly safe here," she murmured, pushing the heavy drawer closed until it clicked. "This place has top-tier security and surveillance everywhere. Nobody is getting in." That evening, we had a formal dinner party to attend downtown. Leah spent hours getting ready at the vanity, and by 7:30 p.m. we left the suite, ensuring the heavy door locked firmly behind us. The evening was lovely, but by 8:30 p.m., the jet lag and exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. My head was pounding, and I could barely keep my eyes open. Leah, however, was full of energy and wanted to stay out late to grab drinks with an old local friend who lived in the city. "Go ahead, back to the room and get some sleep," Leah whispered, handing me the spare key card. "I'll stay out with my friend for a few more hours. Just lock the deadbolt when you get inside." I caught a cab back to the hotel, walked down the silent, crimson-carpeted hallway, and swiped my card. The green light blinked, and I pushed into the dark, quiet suite. I didn't turn on any lights. I simply shed my jacket, crawled into the massive bed, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep within seconds. The nightmare didn't begin until the next morning. I woke up around 8 a.m. to the sound of soft rain tapping against the window panes. Leah was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone. We chatted casually for a bit, laughing about the previous night, before I stood up to begin packing our bags for the 11 a.m. checkout. I walked over to the mahogany vanity table, pulled open the deep wooden drawer, and reached into the back to retrieve our vacation fund. My hand brushed against empty wood. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through my chest. I pulled the drawer out further, violently tossing the guest booklet aside. The space was completely empty. The thick white envelope was gone. "Leah," I stammered, my voice cracking, Did you take the cash envelope out of the drawer last night? Or this morning?" Leah turned to look at me, her expression instantly shifting from casual to deeply alarmed. "No, Peter, I haven't touched that drawer since I was doing my makeup yesterday evening. Check the other drawers." I frantically tore the room apart, ripping open every cabinet, checking under the mattress, and emptying our luggage onto the floor. Nothing. The money had completely vanished. Because there were only 2 key cards, and the room showed absolutely no signs of a forced entry, the reality of the situation felt impossible. Someone had been inside our room while I was sleeping. Driven by pure panic and anger, I hurried down to the lobby and approached the front desk, demanding to speak to management. Seeing the sheer distress on my face, the duty manager escorted me back into a private security office behind the reception desk. A quiet, uniform-clad security guard sat in front of a wall of high-definition monitors. "We need to check the hallway camera for room 412, I told the guard, my hands shaking against the desk. "Our vacation fund was stolen sometime last night while I was asleep in the room." The security guard nodded solemnly, clicking his mouse to pull up the surveillance archive from the previous evening. The digital timestamp reeled backward, settling on the quiet, crimson-carpeted hallway outside our door. The hallway was completely empty. Then, the guard hit play. At exactly 8:46 p.m., the elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open. 2 people stepped out. One was a tall, well-dressed Caucasian man in a dark tailored suit. The other was a shorter Asian woman carrying a small leather clutch. They walked down the long corridor with absolute confidence, stopping directly in front of room 412. The man reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a white card, and swiped it smoothly across our lock. The light blinked green. They opened the door and stepped inside our room, closing it firmly behind them. "Who are they?" I demanded, the blood draining completely from my face. "Did reception double book our room?" "Hold on," the security guard whispered, his eyes wide as he stared into the screen. He moved the mouse, forwarding the tape by just 2 minutes. At exactly 8:48 p.m., the elevator doors opened again. On the screen, I watched myself walk down the hallway, swipe my keycard, and enter room 412. "Rewind it," I yelled. "Fast forward. Show me when that couple leaves the room." The guard aggressively fast-forwarded the footage. The digital timestamp rushed through 9 p.m., midnight, 3 a.m., all the way to 8 a.m. when Leah and I finally emerged from the room. The strange couple never left. A suffocating, icy dread settled over the entire security office. The timeline made absolutely no sense. I had entered that room at 8:48 p.m., exactly 2 minutes after those strangers walked inside. If they were physical, flesh and blood thieves, they would have been trapped in that single-room suite with me. I had slept in that room for nearly 12 hours in total silence. I never heard a whisper, never heard a door open, and never felt a presence. Yet, according to the unedited camera footage, they were still inside that room with me. "We need to get your things out of there right now," the manager said, his voice trembling as he grabbed a master key card. He signaled a heavy-set bellboy to accompany us up to the 4th floor. When we reached room 412, the bellboy pushed the door open, his hand resting cautiously on his belt. The suite was exactly as Leah and I had left it, messy, with clothes scattered from our frantic search, but completely silent. The windows were locked tight from the inside. There was nowhere for 2 adult human beings to hide. I began throwing our clothes into our suitcases, desperate to flee the building, when I noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. The massive frosted glass wall separating the bedroom from the bathroom was heavily obscured, A thick, dense layer of white moisture condensation had formed over the glass, exactly like the steam created by a scalding hot shower. But neither Leah nor I had turned on the hot water that morning. Trembling, I stepped away from the luggage and walked slowly toward the bathroom door. As I got closer, my heart stopped. Pressed perfectly into the dense sheet of condensation on the frosted glass was the unmistakable, detailed silhouette of a human being. It looked as though someone had been standing completely naked in the dark shower, leaning their entire body flat against the glass, staring directly out at the bed where I had been sleeping all night. The impression was fresh. Tiny droplets of water were still actively tracing lines down the glass. "Peter," Leah gasped from the doorway, her voice choked with tears as she looked at the silhouette. The bellboy, pale and sweating, pushed past me into the bathroom. He didn't look at the glass. Instead, he marched straight over to the small, stainless steel wastebasket sitting next to the toilet. He reached inside and lifted a piece of crumpled tissue paper. Resting perfectly intact at the very bottom of the empty trash can was the thick, white paper envelope. I lunged forward, snatched the envelope from his hand, and ripped it open. Every single dollar of our vacation cash was still inside, untouched. The entities hadn't broken into our room to steal our money. They had drawn it out, hiding it in the dark, simply to force us to look into the room. We didn't stay to check out. We left our keys on the counter, grabbed our bags, and ran out of the historic hotel, refusing to look back at the grand facade. We spent the rest of our vacation at a modern, sterile business motel near the airport, completely unable to enjoy the rest of our time away. It's been months since we returned home, but the psychological scar of that 5-star suite hasn't left us. I can't look at luxury properties the same way anymore. Every time Leah and I travel now, I refuse to book any room with modern glass fixtures or historic charm. Because every night, when I turn off the lights in a strange room, I am haunted by the terrifying image on that security monitor and the freezing realization that while I slept in total silence, someone was standing inside the glass, watching me breathe in the dark.